So I guess maybe what we'll do is we'll start at the very beginning. So you live in New Brunswick, but you're not from New Brunswick. So Beth, maybe tell everybody where you're from and how you made it here.
Well, I will start by saying that I feel like a New Brunswicker because I've lived in New Brunswick for 53 years.
Wow.
So, I came as a very young person. I was born in Connecticut, and at this moment, I'm in the house where my mother still lives. She's 100, and I'm sitting at the desk that I first wrote on. And I wrote my first novel at this desk when I was 8 years old, and I can tell you exactly what it was about.
Does your mother have a copy of it still?
I think I have a copy of it somewhere. And
Wow.
anyway, yeah, so my husband Peter and I came to New Brunswick in 1970. Um, and we bought a farm south of Sussex, and we've lived there ever since.
Wow.
Peter's an artist, and interestingly, we came with Bob and Kathy Osborne, who now run the Cornhill Nursery. We were school friends, and we were my mother's family had come from New Brunswick, and we just thought let's go, let's see what it's like there, and we fell in love with New Brunswick and stayed.
So you're a come from away, but not really, because 19, I would think anything before 1980 is definitely New Brunswicker.
I think so too, because I'm always thinking about, oh, they've come here. I wonder why they came here. The way you
Yeah.
do, and then
Yeah.
I'm thinking like a New Brunswicker. Totally. My entire adult life has been lived in New Brunswick.
So what has that done kind of related to your writing? Where did your writing begin, aside from the 8-year-old who penned her first novel? Where did your writing journey begin?
My writing journey began when I was a very small child and I learned to read. I learned to read before I went to school because my brother was reading and I wanted to read, and I don't remember learning how to read. And um, it was the 1950s, and people were getting televisions, but my parents refused to get one of those because they wanted us to read. And my grandfather who was the one from New Brunswick, that's his background. He was a professor of Victorian literature and poetry at Brown University. So when I grew up, every family event was my grandfather reading poetry to us. So I was kind of bathed in books and reading, and the beautiful little library that actually I was at just a couple of days ago. It's still there. Um, going to the library and bringing home books. And my writing journey began with um, a very my imagination, and how I love to live in my imagination. And that led to me wanting to be an actor. So when I was in high school, I'm small and I looked young. And so I would play child parts in the university productions at the University of Connecticut. So I thought, well, I'm going to be an actor. So I majored in theater. And then I shifted my major over to creative writing. And then when we came to New Brunswick, of course, I wasn't going to be an actor living in a
In
farm
rural
south.
New Brunswick.
No, but I was certainly able to be a writer. So I began chronicling, without even realizing it, my life there, in terms of keeping a diary, writing long letters to my parents about the incredible world that was opening up to us in New Brunswick. And in fact, my first published novel starts with the words, my first published book starts with the words, "The coyotes are newcomers. They were blown here by the winds of night," something like that. And then I compare the coyotes to us, like, the coyotes are newcomers. They've just come into these hills, and we've just come into these hills. And what is our relationship? And it was I was thinking about the relationship between humans and nature, and are we part of nature, or are we separate from nature? And that was kind of the basis of that book, but it was the story of our moving to New Brunswick. So that was a very long answer to a simple question. Where did my writing journey start?
But in terms of the writing itself, you know, the old adage is write what you know. What did those experiences kind of lend to your repertoire? I mean, once you become a writer, you're always writing, but what did, you know, life changes do for your writing, do you think?
Well, that's a very interesting question, one that I've thought about a lot, because there are a couple of factors that make my novels, every aspect of every one of them, to a greater or lesser extent, takes place in the past, from the 1600s to the 1911 to the 3 books in the 1800s. And part of that comes from my childhood, because I grew up surrounded with the past, because my grandparents lived in a house that my family had lived in since 1790, and they were pack rats, and everything was still there. You know, so all of us, me, my cousins, my brother, we were always playing with the ancient old toys, and, you know, croquet sets and all the stuff
Anything
that,
that's, yeah, anything that looks
you know how it
interesting.
is. We'd find the yeah, stuff, we think, wonder what this was for. And we found, you know, boxes of hat boxes, which became my first novel, The Hatbox Letters. But then, interestingly, when we came to New Brunswick, we were fired up by the notion of living simply on the land because of the environmental crisis that was very clear in 1970 and is even clearer today.
Wow. Yeah.
And what we wanted to do was grow our own food, grow organic food, make things that were useful and sell them to make a living. So Peter was a potter. And so we had a wood stove. For years, I cooked on a wood stove.
Wow.
The first few years, we actually cut down 12 cords of wood and split it and stacked it, but we never, ever did that again. We realized this is ridiculous. And, and the house needed 12 cords of wood to heat because it needed to be insulated. But my point is that I know what it feels like to stoke a fire and to push the pots to the part of the stove that's hottest, and to protect the wood, the bread, so it doesn't burn on the side that the firebox is, and what it's like to have a cow and milk the cow and separate the cream, and, you know, and have a garden and pick the potatoes, and what it all feels like. And that's why I think I love to write about New Brunswick in the 1860s. And
Because you kind of lived that for a while.
I did. I kind of lived it for a while, and I'm fascinated with thinking, who lived in this house and these houses that are around me, and how did they live, and what did they feel about their lives, and you know. And then I wrote one about somebody who goes to sea, and I would stand in our door of our house, and I would look towards the Bay of Fundy, which is about 25 minutes from us in St. Martin's, and I would think, how would I feel if my husband was out there and it's a dark night and I know he's on the sea and he's heading somewhere, and somebody could very well have stood in our house and had those thoughts. So your question is, how did my life affect my writing? That's very much one of the ways. The other way life, I think, affects everybody's writing is that all of my books, when I really think about it, are questions to myself to which I don't know the answers. And when I wrote The Hatbox Letters, for example, which is about a woman whose husband has died, and her sister comes with all the Hatbox letters from her grandparents and dumps them on her. When I wrote that book, I was so missing all the family that was gone, my grandparents, my aging aunts and uncles, that whole world, the house was gone, sold, and this whole texture. And I thought, how do I deal with this? How do I stop missing them? How do I stop longing for them? How do I accept that I'm living now and that's gone? And I thought, well, anyway, that was the basis of that book, was that question to myself. And at some point when I was writing it, I actually thought, I get it. I'm
Do
starting
you
to.
have the answer? Because now I want to know, because I do that all the time. I think everybody does that. We lament, like you
Yeah.
look back at pictures and you remember those times and they seemed so simple and so basic, but just so full of like everything you needed to become the person you became, but you can't go back. So did you answer your question?
Well, I think I did. I answered it in that I understood the way in which, if you don't come to terms with that in yourself, it can become very crippling and you can't move forward in your life. And I saw that my great grandmother had done that. She'd taken the house and said, don't anybody ever change anything in this house. And it's got to stay the same. And I realized that because of that, she had become a very unhappy person. And that I just had to say, yes, that was wonderful. And those times were great, but get a grip on where I'm living now and what's happening now. And, it's always a matter of acceptance, unfortunately, which is always very hard.
Nothing is easy, it seems. So in terms of you being chosen for the Woodstock Reads, how did that feel when they called?
I was absolutely thrilled. I love this idea. I love the idea. I think the idea is that everybody in town, if they are interested, reads the book.
Yes.
I think that's I've heard about that model before, and I think it's a fantastic way to get everybody reading and talking. And I've heard about people who had this happen in their town, and how you meet people in the grocery store and say, what page are you on, and has this happened? And don't tell me. And I've also heard that in certain European countries, there's more people read books maybe than, this was a while ago I heard this, but I thought it was so interesting that people would be on a train and they'd be reading a book, and the person next to them says, what are you reading? And everybody's talking about books and what are you reading? And so I think it's a very a good thing to do, sort of culturally.
Do you think that books are I don't know if they're in the middle of a bit of a renaissance again? Like I can't do the e-reader. I find myself gravitating more to reading at night to kind of calm my brain down and kind of get me ready for bed. But I think COVID changed our habits to some degree, and
Yeah.
the slowing down of things had some of us reading again. What did COVID do for you for your writing, I wonder?
Well, let me back up. It's a two-part question.
Sorry, I'm not supposed to do that. I tell people not to do that all the time, and I just did.
The beginning of the question was, is there a renaissance? And I think that there was a great deal of worry that the book was going to disappear, but it certainly hasn't. And I think that books are thriving, and reading and book clubs, are more and more book clubs. So that's my answer to that is yes, I do. And what COVID did to me was interesting, because this book, The Sister's Tale, my editor and I were working on this book during COVID. And so I was just working away like I always do during COVID. I mean, it wasn't that different for me because both my husband and I work at home. So it wasn't that different. It's just, it was a lot lonelier, right? No
Yes.
parties, no people coming over. But my editor, Craig Payette, bless his heart, was in Toronto in a fairly small house with his wife who worked at home, he worked at home, and two children trying to go to school at home. And so, he's editing my book, and I'll hear him saying something to his son like, I'm busy right now. Could we save that till later? And then I'm thinking, oh, can you imagine? You got 2 kids are coming in with their algebra homework or whatever, and you're trying to concentrate. And I was just so impressed with him that he was able to do that. And he said he and many editors would just give up, and they'd stop their work, they'd be with their kids, they'd help them with their schoolwork, and then they'd start work at 8 o'clock at night and
Yeah.
work until 2 in the morning.
Yeah.
And that's what he did. And we did get this, many drafts, but and it changed the way it worked too, because usually an editor sends me the entire book. Okay, here's my go through of this draft. And he would say, okay, I've got 4 chapters done. I'm going to get them to you. And then he would send them to me, of course, electronically. And I would do those 4 chapters, and then the next ones would come. So, and there was actually a really neat article done in the Toronto Star about us as an editor author team during COVID and how
Nice.
we did it. But another thing that happened to me during COVID, which I think a lot of people will respond to, is I got so anxious and so sad and so scared that I wrote a memoir, which has not been published yet, and I may go back and work on it, about my grandparents, because I just wanted to be in the safest, most wonderful place, and I just wanted to remember it. And so I did that.
Wow.
And there it sits. I mean, I haven't worked on it because most memoirs need these days, they need to have an issue and a problem and a solving of the problem. But there are some very beautiful memoirs that I've loved very much that are really about a beloved and past time. And you just go there and you live those memories with the writer. I don't know if I can do that. I might try, and I don't know.
I would buy it. As a person who misses her grandparents and those simpler times, totally, I would buy it.
Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about the book that everybody is going to be coming to see you for. So tell us a little bit about The Sister's Tale without giving everything away, and tell us why you wanted to write that.
Okay. I realized that The Sister's Tale came from my desire to write about a lost girl. I didn't know who she was, but it's been haunting me for years. An image I had, and I can remember the exact moment I had the image. I was coming up from the beach on the Bay of Fundy, and I saw some goldenrod shining in the light. And I had an image of a child living with a woman in a house somewhere near the Bay of Fundy. And I didn't know anything about them, and I jotted it down in my journal, and it's just stuck with me. And so I thought, I'm gonna explore that idea. I just explore it. So I started exploring it. And what happened was I wrote two entire drafts of a novel about a runaway girl, time present, and she's cleaning at somebody's attic, and she finds an article about the paupers actually in Sussex, New Brunswick, at the pauper auction. And I suddenly thought, who were, and there's a 15-year-old girl who did in fact come up for auction. And I just started thinking, who was that girl? And everybody in Sussex knows about the pauper auction. I mean, people just do. It's a part of Sussex history. And if anybody interested in history knows about it, knows that it took place at the train station, knows that it was kind of a dark thing in Sussex's memory. So I started looking into it, and I started weaving the story of this girl into this contemporary novel, and I knew what was going to happen. I just knew it. And eventually my agent said, she'd read the second complete draft, and she said, you know what? I think you got to throw all the present stuff out and stick with the story takes place in the past.
Okay.
And I thought I knew that was going to happen. I just knew
So
it.
you did 3 drafts then, technically.
Well, I did 2 complete novels that are totally different from The
Different.
Sister's Tale. And then once I got onto the story that took place completely in the past, of course, there's always draft after draft after draft. But then I really got into the story that I really knew I wanted to tell. But it took a lot of trips to the archives, to the New Brunswick Museum, because I needed to be truthful to the time and little details, and I won't give anything away except to say, for example, in the paupers auction, there's the overseer of the poor who has to put them up to auction. So I needed to know, who are the overseers of the poor? How were they selected? What was their job like? How did they feel about that job? So I went to this New Brunswick Museum and I read letters about or actual papers to do with the overseers of the poor. And a lot of this stuff is very dry, and you have to pick out the interesting little details, the little details that make it come alive.
That would resonate with people here because we had poor farms here, which had overseers as well. So
yeah. So I mean, so that's how it started. And a character from a previous book walks into this novel. A character from The Sea Captain's Wife walks into this book, and it suddenly occurred to me, this is New Brunswick. Families, are very likely to have relationships with other families, and she could very well have been his aunt, and maybe I could bring her back. And when I did that, I actually remember my scalp kind of tingling a little bit, thinking, I could bring her back, because I miss my characters so much when books are done. So I started to meld the books, and it's an incredible process, how these things grow. But
I think it's neat because for writers, it all comes from up here, and people get to marvel at what's up here. And these things are just created, from imagination, and walks on the beach and sitting and, looking through all that dry stuff at the archives in Fredericton. So in terms of you bringing all of this stuff to life, and you talk about missing your characters, how hard is it to finally let that go? How hard is it to say, I'm done after all of these little edits and tweaks and things? How hard is that to kind of let it go?
I'm used to it now. I mean, I've done quite a few novels, and I think, okay, it becomes a bit of a collaborative effort with your editor, and you both have a lot of you both care about it a lot. Your editor cares about it so much. And so when you and your editor say, I think this is it. I think it's time to go to the copy editor, and then it's time to go to the proofreader. And then you start getting your galleys, and you're just making tiny little changes, tinier and tinier changes. And then finally, you've been through it so many times. I mean, I've read this.
Maybe it's easy to let it go. Maybe you're just wanting to throw it out.
Actually, it is. You think, you know what? It's done. I can't find a single other change that I'm ready to make. It's done.
I'm not sure if I can read that sentence over another time. I don't know.
Exactly. But the interesting thing, and I think you'll find this is true with most writers, is once you've got that final draft done and it's the final draft, you're already, this little seeds are stirring about, what am I going to do next? What am I going to do next? And that's
So what are you going to do next, Beth?
I can't say, because I'm not at that stage yet.
But are there other little girls in fields?
Oh wait, no, I'm sorry. I'm a whole book ahead of you with that
Yes,
question.
because of your grandparents.
No, I'm a whole book ahead of you when you say, what are you going to do next? Because I already have done the next one next. I
Oh,
have another novel that's about to go through finish a second draft. And it's a sequel to this one.
oh, nice. So did that original where you went to the future and then you decided, no, we have to keep in the past. So are we going to see a future one then, the sequel?
No, no, the sequel takes place 1 year after this book ends.
Okay.
So, and that isn't still, I'm still working on it. But honestly, somewhere inside me, I'm thinking, and then what am I going to do? I mean, really, that's what I meant when I said I'm a book ahead of you, because I haven't written the next book. I have written it and it's gone to my agent and it's going back to her again, and then it'll go to an editor and then it will go into the production stage. And that will complete a trilogy about this family.
Wow.
And then I'm thinking, that's why I'm thinking,
What?
yes, I will finally let those people go.
Okay.
I'm going to get confused when I'm talking to people in Woodstock because I'm thinking, wait a minute, is that in the
First
sequel
book,
or is
second
that
book?
in this book? You know, exactly. I have to
Yeah.
be careful. I could give away things. But it's true that people, you stir towards the possibility of something else, because I think it's a human, it's this thing where you think anything is possible. And before you narrow it down and make your choice, you're in this wonderful
Anything.
place
Yeah.
where anything could happen. What could I write about next? And it's this glorious everything, you know what I mean? It's just glorious when it's just a dream. And
Everything
you
is on the table then, right?
yeah, it's just a dream, and you haven't started to say, oh God, but that means that this and this, you know, there's no
Restrictions.
no restrictions. It's just, what am I going to do next? And it's always going to be wonderful. And you know, it's a nice stage to be at.
It's the
And
daydream stage. Somebody else told me that that's your daydream stage where you're actually sitting in. So does that mean that there are other girls? Are there other little characters that are in your head waiting to kind of find the right story to kind of come alive in? Because you talked about carrying that little girl in the goldenrod for how long?
yeah, maybe 5 or 6 years. I don't know, you know, because I haven't actually gotten to that stage, because I'm still in the developing the a novel stage. Um, and you know, one of the things I'm thinking that people are always interested in is, people always say to me, isn't it so hard when you give it to your editor and they tear it apart? And I say, no, you have to let that happen. You have to accept that those are eyes. Those are the eyes that you want and you trust, and you know that they're going to make that book better. So I'm still at that stage where the second draft that I've written, I'm thinking, I'm not sure, you know, whether I might have to do this or that or that. So I'm still very much in uh, the hard work, the really hard work stage of creating the next book. So I can't be daydreaming. I can't. I'm to daydream.
In terms of inspiration for other people who are aspiring to write, what suggestions do you make, or do you tell people when they're saying, I think I'd like to write books, or I have this draft and what should I do now? Like, what are some of those base core things that you pass along to people?
Well, if people really have a project that they are wanting to like, if they really have something that they want to write, and they're not just thinking I'd like to be a writer, but they really
The
have something.
story up there kind of thing.
Yeah, I say you have to be consistent, and you have to be you have to look at it like a job, because nothing gets done if you just think, oh, maybe I'll do a little bit today and then next month I'll do a little bit. I mean, maybe something gets done, but you need to be just plod along steadily and sit down and do it, and not think that it's got to be right or perfect or that what you're writing is what going to be the thing that it will be. You just need to trust in the process and sit down and just trust your instinct and think, I feel like writing about this. Now I think like I'm going to write about this. And pretty soon the project begins to have a life of its own, and it kind of generates its own energy. And so that's important. I think Virginia Woolf's A Room of One's Own is really important too, where you establish a place that's yours, even if it's just a corner of the living room or a closet or anything, a part of the bedroom, that this is where I write. This is where I keep my books. This is where I keep my notebooks. This is where I keep my laptop, or I take my laptop when I'm going to write. And treat that like your special place. When I sit down at my desk at home, I work in a room that's over the kitchen, and it's kind of like a garret. It's got the low ceilings and the narrow windows looking east, and the door that goes out into the attic. It's an old farmhouse, and I sit down at that desk and I feel like I'm at home. This is where I'm meant to be. This is my place. I just feel comfortable here. And so that's really important. And another thing is not to get hung up on perfecting your sentences. That comes away later. The point is, and it also, you don't think this is the first sentence, this is the first chapter. You just plunge in and start writing. And I'll tell you, I have never written the beginning or the end of a book without having to do them, particularly the beginning, at least 5 or 6 or 7 or even 8 times, because you know yourself, when you pick a book up in the bookstore and you open that first page and it doesn't draw you in,
you put it down.
You put it down. But you can't do that until you know your story and you know your characters and you know what angle to go into that story. You can't write the first page until you've written the whole book. And then you go back and you think, this is where it should start, right here. All that stuff that I put beforehand, throw that out, or maybe use it as backstory. But you've got to start at the point where something is happening that's really important,
significant.
And so, having worked with super editors for years, you learn so much from them, and a lot of it is about pacing, and and when it's great to go deep and when it's okay to skim along the top, and all the shaping of a book. It's like writing, it's like a symphony, it's like music. Anyway.
So if this latest novel is a symphony, is it a fast one? Is it a waltz? Is it something that is, well, it would be an older piece of music then?
Well, I think like any symphony, there are all different moods, and the moods often, usually with a novel, there are moods that correspond to not only plot but to character. But usually there is a crescendo, as there is a symphony, and there's a denouement, and it's just the shape of a novel. Like almost every novel I can think of, it builds up to this, when the knot that needs to, it's like something explodes or something happens that you're waiting to have happen. And then but then once that happens, there's going to be a change in everything, and everything will kind of come falling gradually down to the end.
But this continues.
If it was a symphony, you're sitting in your chair and oh, this part is really nice. Oh, this part is a little bit dark, and this part.
Something foreboding is coming because I can hear the drums a little more bassy.
Yeah, all that.
You've got, you've got all the variants of that music. So when you come to Woodstock, what are you hoping the readers get from your visit, but also the book?
Well, from my visit, I hope that they will ask me questions. I mean, I love to talk to readers, and I love it when people ask me questions, and I can just talk about something. And it's interesting, you know, as a writer, I don't blast into a dinner party and say, "Hey, guess what I do?" or "This is what I wrote today." No, I don't talk about what I do. But I love to talk about it when people are really, really interested and they really want to know. You know, in other words, I like it when it's a dynamic.
Engaged reader.
Yeah, anyway, so that's what I hope. I hope I meet readers and get to talk to them. And what the book does is something that it has done for me, and that is that learning about New Brunswick history has incredibly enriched my living in the present in New Brunswick. Because I'll give you an example. When we first moved here, St. John was right at the tail end of an awful urban, you know, that urban renewal stuff where they
Yeah.
tore down Main Street and then the bridge went in. And I mean, it was a hard time. We didn't see the heyday of St. John. We saw one of the hardest times. And I didn't know the history of St. John. I just saw it with these eyes. I saw 1970 St. John. It was kind of
Gray, very gray.
gray. It was gray and it wasn't fun. And there was no uptown and there was no, you know, there were no galleries and restaurants. It was just a hard time in St. John's history. And so aside from living there near St. John, that's our main city, I started to learn the history. And now when I look at St. John, I look into the harbor and my eyes see that pile of square rigged ships lined up there. And I see the slovens, you know, lined up with all the stuff floating onto the ships. And, you know, and I see the fire and I think, oh my, where did they go when that fire was happening? And then the same thing has happened to me with Sussex, is that I've been studying the history of Sussex, and now I go down a street and I see those big houses and I think, yeah, this is where they live, and this is where I put them, and that's where that was happening, and that's where the old skating rink was, and it's like it's a relationship with place that I think history is so important to make you understand where you're living, and it just is very enriching. So many people have told me that the Sister's Tale taught them a lot about women's, particularly the struggle that women had with getting the vote, becoming
Recognized as persons, for Pete's sake. Yes.
recognized as persons. This is what this book is really about, is about the struggle that women have had. And so that was a lot of my research, was what was happening in New Brunswick. Who were the women who were going to the legislature and saying, why can't we vote? And who were the women activists and what were they fighting for and why and all that. So
And you're bringing that history to life, which is really important right now too. So.
yeah, and I think it brings it to life in a way that people say, well, I couldn't really put the book down. It was really exciting. So, and that's what I love. That's the way I like to learn history.
Is this one of your favorite books?
The Sister's Tale? I don't really have a favorite. I have a baby. Which is my first novel. And, you know, because it's your first novel, it's kind of like, oh, because you remember the excitement of actually completing a novel and having it be well received. But they're all different, and I don't know, they're isn't it interesting? They're just like, it's kind of like having a family of cats or something. Our children, I mean,
No, you have favorites, but you can't say that they're favorites. And they're favorites at different times and different stages, and there's different things that you love about each of them. But yeah, I get it that you can't kind of pick, except you do have a baby, just like everybody else does.
I do have a baby. Yeah.
That's wonderful. I look forward to
And it's probably, excuse me, but it's probably a baby because I love my grandparents so much like you do.
Yeah, and that's the thing. You bringing history alive is something that will really resonate with a lot of people.
Yeah.
I think that the way the world is right now, many of us pine for simpler times. And the best way to kind of delve into those simpler times is to get a book, because you're immersed right in it. It's like a movie in your head. You forget time and place, and books are just so important, I believe, to our mental health. So I am looking forward to Woodstock Reads. I know lots of people are looking forward to meeting you, and thanks for taking a huge chunk of your time as you're at your mom's. 100 years old, that's wonderful lineage.
Yeah.
Fingers crossed.
Yeah.
Is her attic as full as your grandparents?
No attic could possibly be as full as my grandparents. In fact, a lot of what was in that attic came to New Brunswick with us. We've never had to buy furniture because there was so much that gets spread around amongst the cousins, and said, you take that. I'm really looking forward to coming to Woodstock, and
we're really looking forward to having
it. It's going to be fun. Yeah.